My family always said I meant everything to them and that they appreciated me. When I quietly stopped helping, their reaction revealed something I was never supposed to notice. For most of my adult life, I was the reliable one in my family. That was the label everyone used, usually with a smile and a pat on the shoulder, like it was some kind of badge of honor. Reliable Mark. Dependable Mark. The guy who always showed up, always answered his phone, always had a solution tucked away in his back pocket. If someone needed help moving, I was there before they even finished the sentence. If a bill came up short or a plan fell apart, I filled the gap without being asked. Time, money, energy, emotional space. I gave it all so easily that I barely noticed it leaving me. Early on, the praise felt good. It felt warm. My mom would tell her friends how lucky she was to have a son like me, someone who never hesitated to help family. My sister would joke that I was the glue holding everyone together. Even my dad, who was never big on compliments, would nod and say I had my head on straight. Those moments stuck with me. I carried them around like proof that I mattered. But along with the praise came expectations. Quiet ones at first. Subtle. If I helped once, it was assumed I would help again. If I solved a problem, I became the default problem solver. Nobody asked if I had time. Nobody wondered if I was tired. It was just understood that I would make it work. And I told myself that this was what love looked like. Showing up. Sacrificing. Being useful. There were small moments I brushed off back then. Like when I mentioned feeling burned out after weeks of covering extra expenses and late-night calls, and the response was a laugh and a comment about how I had always been strong. Or when I talked about a rough week at work and the conversation drifted back to someone else's crisis within seconds. My needs never caused arguments. They just disappeared. Inside, I felt two things at once, and they did not sit well together. I felt proud that my family leaned on me, and I felt strangely empty when I tried to lean back. I would lie in bed at night replaying conversations, wondering why I felt so unseen when everyone said they appreciated me. I told myself I was being dramatic, ungrateful. After all, they needed me. That had to mean something. The truth started creeping in slowly, like a draft through a door I did not realize was open. I noticed how quickly the room shifted when I said no, even to small things. I noticed how my value seemed to spike when I had something to offer and flatten when I did not. Still, I held on. I kept giving, convinced that if I just did a little more, it would even out. Then came the week when everything I had been pouring out finally ran dry, and I realized I had built my place in this family on something that could disappear overnight. And I had no idea what would happen to me once it did. The funny thing is, nobody ever sat me down and told me my role. There was no family meeting where they said, "Mark, you are the provider now." It just happened, quietly, one favor at a time, until it felt permanent. It started years back with small, reasonable stuff. My sister Emily needed help with a security deposit after a breakup. I wired the money without thinking twice. She thanked me, hugged me, told me I was a lifesaver. That word stuck. Lifesaver. A week later, my mom needed help covering a medical bill that insurance dragged its feet on. I handled it. My dad needed help fixing his truck. I spent an entire Saturday under the hood, grease on my hands, telling myself this was just what sons did. Every time, there was gratitude. Brief, glowing, almost ceremonial. And then it faded. Not into nothing, but into expectation. The next ask came faster. The thanks came shorter. Sometimes it was just a nod or a text with a thumbs-up emoji. I told myself not to be petty about it. Love was not transactional. Family was not supposed to keep score. What I did not notice at first was how my support was no longer seen as a choice. It was treated like a feature, like the hot water in the house. Always there, always running, nobody thinking about what happened if it stopped. There were moments when my own life tried to push back. Long days at work when my chest felt tight from stress. Nights when I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering why I felt so drained when I was doing everything right. I would hint at it lightly. Say I was tired. Say I might need a break. The responses were always the same. Someone else had it worse. Someone else needed me more. I remember one specific Sunday. I had planned to spend it alone. No errands. No phone calls. Just quiet. I woke up feeling something close to peace for the first time in weeks. Then my phone buzzed. Emily again. A last-minute crisis. Nothing life-threatening. Just inconvenient. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, and felt this strange mix of resentment and guilt crash into each other. I answered anyway. After that call, I sat on the edge of my bed and thought, if I disappear for a day, who would notice why? The question scared me, so I pushed it away. The praise never stopped, but it changed shape. It became public, performative. My mom would tell people how generous I was, how lucky the family was to have me. But in private, when I talked about my own plans, my own exhaustion, the room went quiet. My happiness was treated like an optional side quest. Nice if it happened, but not essential. I kept telling myself I was loved. They needed me. They trusted me. That had to count for something. Still, a voice in the back of my head kept asking why nobody ever asked what I needed. I ignored that voice until the night I realized I had given so much that there was nothing left in me to give at all. And that was when everything changed. The night I hit empty did not come with fireworks or some dramatic collapse. It was quiet, almost boring. That was the scariest part. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a stack of unopened mail and a phone that would not stop lighting up. Work had been brutal for weeks. Long hours, constant pressure, the kind of stress that settles into your shoulders and refuses to leave. On top of that, my savings account was thinner than it had ever been, thanks to a series of temporary family emergencies that never seemed to end. I felt off that day, heavy, like my body was moving a few seconds behind my mind. I remember thinking I should probably talk to someone about it. Maybe take a day off. Maybe finally say no. Then my phone rang again. This time it was my dad. Something about a repair he needed done fast. He said it casually, like he was asking me to pick up milk on the way home. I listened, nodding even though he could not see me, and felt this strange pressure building in my chest. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. I told him I could not do it. Not that night. Not this week. I said I was exhausted. I said I needed a little time. The silence on the other end stretched longer than it should have. When he finally spoke, his tone had shifted. It was not cruel. It was disappointed, like I had failed some unspoken test. He reminded me of everything the family had been through. He reminded me that everyone was counting on me. He did not ask how I was feeling. He just waited. I felt something crack inside me then. Not loudly, more like a hairline fracture. I repeated myself. I said no. The call ended shortly after. No argument. No resolution. Just a flat goodbye. What happened next was subtle, but I noticed it immediately. The group chat went quiet. Messages that usually came non-stop slowed to nothing. When I did hear from someone, it was clipped, polite, transactional. The warmth was gone. A few days later, I showed up to a family dinner I had already committed to. I felt like a guest instead of a fixture. Conversations flowed around me, not toward me. When problems came up, people glanced at me, then away, like they were recalculating something. I realized then that my value had dipped the moment my usefulness did. Driving home that night, I felt a mix of relief and grief. Relief because I finally understood what had been happening. Grief because understanding did not make it hurt less. I had spent years believing I was loved for who I was, only to see how quickly that love cooled when I stopped providing. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. If I had nothing left to give, who was I to them? The answer was starting to form, and I was not sure I was ready to face it yet. Once I saw it, I could not unsee it. That was the real problem. I started replaying years of memories like a bad documentary I had somehow starred in without realizing it. Every holiday where I picked up the check without being asked. Every late-night phone call that began with panic and ended with me fixing something I did not break. Every time someone told me, almost proudly, "I do not know what we would do without you." As if that sentence explained everything. At work, people noticed the change before my family did. A coworker asked if I was all right after I snapped over something small. Another pulled me aside and told me I looked worn down. That stuck with me. Strangers could see it. My own family could not, or would not. I decided to test something, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. I stopped offering. I still showed up. I still listened. But I did not jump in with solutions the second a problem surfaced. I waited. The shift was immediate. Silences stretched longer. People talked around issues instead of through them. There were awkward laughs, forced optimism. Someone would eventually glance at me, like they were expecting me to step in and rescue the moment. When I did not, the mood soured. My sister asked me one evening if something was wrong with me. Not in a caring way. More like she was checking to see if a tool was malfunctioning. I told her I was just tired. She said everyone was tired and changed the subject. That night, I found an old notebook in a drawer, one I had used years ago to track expenses when money was tight. Out of curiosity, I flipped through it. Page after page was filled with numbers tied to family help, loans that were never repaid, bills I covered, repairs I handled. I had written them down back then, telling myself it was just for organization. Looking at it now felt like being punched in the chest. This was not generosity. This was a system, and I was the foundation holding it up. Then came the twist I never saw coming. I got a call from a distant cousin I barely spoke to. He sounded nervous. He asked if I knew how bad things really were. Before I could ask what he meant, he told me my parents had been leaning on me to cover gaps they never admitted to anyone else. Debt. Decisions made years ago that had quietly snowballed. My help had not been easing the burden. It had been hiding it. I hung up and sat there in the dark, realizing something terrifying. They did not just appreciate what I provided. They depended on it to avoid facing their own reality. That was why my boundaries felt like betrayal to them. For the first time, I understood that staying in this role was not love. It was enabling a lie. Still, knowing that did not make the next step easier. Because if I stopped, everything would shift. Not just how they treated me, but how they saw me. And I had no idea who I would be in their eyes once I was no longer useful. I went to bed that night knowing I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. And I had not yet decided whether I was going to step forward or retreat. I did not make some big announcement after that night. No speech. No ultimatum. I just started pulling back in ways that felt almost invisible at first. I stopped answering my phone immediately. If someone texted, I waited. Sometimes hours. Sometimes until the next day. The world did not end. Fires did not burn unchecked. But the tone changed fast. Messages became sharper. Follow-ups came quicker. The unspoken panic bled through the screen. At the same time, my own life started whispering to me again. Small things. I slept through the night for the first time in months. I took a walk after work instead of collapsing on the couch. I cooked an actual meal instead of grabbing whatever was fastest. It felt wrong, like I was skipping a responsibility, but it also felt steady, grounded. Then came the first real test. My mom called one afternoon, her voice already tight before she finished saying my name. Something had come up. Unexpected expense. She said it like a familiar script, like we had rehearsed this scene 100 times. I listened. I did not interrupt. When she paused, waiting for the part where I stepped in, I told her I could not help right now. The silence was louder than anything she could have said. She reminded me of everything she had done for me growing up. Sacrifices. Long nights. All true. All heavy. Then she said something that landed differently than she probably intended. She said she did not know what had gotten into me lately, but I was not acting like myself. That sentence sat with me long after the call ended. Because she was right. I was not acting like the version of me they had grown comfortable with. The version that absorbed pressure so no one else had to. The version that made their lives easier at the cost of my own. Family dinners grew tense after that. I was still invited, but the warmth felt forced. Jokes stopped when I walked into the room. When problems came up, people watched me closely, like they were waiting to see if I would cave. When I did not, frustration leaked out in side comments and sighs. I felt guilty, deeply, like I was breaking some sacred rule. But underneath that guilt was something else, something sharper. Anger. Not explosive anger. Focused anger. The kind that comes from realizing how long you have been quietly cornered. The twist came when my sister finally said out loud what everyone else was dancing around. She told me the family was worried about me. Said I had changed. Said I was being distant and selfish. She asked if something was wrong with my job, or if I was struggling financially, because that was the only explanation that made sense to her. The idea that I might be choosing myself did not even register. That was when it hit me. They could not imagine me outside the role I played for them. My worth, in their eyes, was tied directly to what I provided. Without that, I was a problem to be solved, not a person to be understood. I drove home that night with my hands tied on the steering wheel, realizing I was standing at a crossroads I could not avoid anymore. Either I went back to being useful and miserable, or I kept going and accepted whatever came next. And for the first time, I was not sure my family would come with me if I chose myself. The breaking point did not come from another request for money or another disappointed sigh. It came from something I never saw aimed at me. I found out by accident. A coworker pulled me aside late one afternoon and asked me if everything was okay at home. He looked uncomfortable, like he was stepping into something personal he did not want to touch. I asked him what he meant, and he hesitated before telling me that my aunt had called the office earlier that week. She had asked questions about my schedule, about how busy I was, about whether I seemed stressed. At first, I felt a flicker of concern. Then he added the part that made my stomach drop. She had laughed and said the family was worried I was burning out, and that I might not be able to help as much anymore if I did not get myself together. Help, not health, not happiness. Help. I thanked him and walked back to my desk like nothing had happened. But inside, something shifted hard and fast. This was not just pressure anymore. This was monitoring. They were tracking my capacity the way you keep an eye on a machine that might be nearing its limit. That night, I did not sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing how deep this went. My role had become so fixed that even my exhaustion was framed as an inconvenience to manage, not a warning sign to care about. They were not worried about losing me. They were worried about losing what I provided. The next family gathering confirmed it. They were nicer than usual. Too nice. My mom asked if I was eating enough. My dad told a story about how proud he was of my work ethic. My sister offered to handle something herself for once, then immediately followed it with a reminder that she might still need me later. It felt rehearsed, like they were trying to stabilize something that was starting to wobble. I smiled. I nodded. I played along. Inside, I was grieving. Not loudly. Quietly. I was mourning the version of my family I thought I had. The one where love was unconditional and support flowed both ways. That version was slipping away, replaced by something colder and clearer. The twist hit at the end of the night. As people were leaving, my mom pulled me aside and asked, carefully, whether everything was all right financially. She said it like a doctor asking about symptoms. When I told her I was fine, she looked relieved. Too relieved. Then she said, almost under her breath, that it was good, because the family really needed me steady right now. I drove home with that sentence echoing in my head. They did not need me happy. They needed me steady, functional, available. That was the moment I stopped feeling confused. I realized that if I kept letting them define me this way, I would disappear into the role completely. And worse, they would never even notice. But the hardest part was still ahead, because clarity does not make loss painless. And I was about to find out just how quickly love can change shape when it is no longer being fed. Once the illusion cracked, everything after that felt sharper, louder, like I had been living with cotton stuffed in my ears, and someone finally pulled it out. I stopped reaching out first. No check-in texts, no casual offers to help, just silence on my end unless someone contacted me directly. It was not done out of spite. I needed to know what would happen if I simply existed instead of contributed. At first, nothing happened. A few days passed, then a week. The quiet felt strange, but also peaceful. I noticed how much space there was in my head when it was not filled with other people's emergencies. I started thinking about things I had put off for years. A class I had wanted to take. A trip I had never planned because it felt irresponsible to leave. Even the idea of rest felt radical. Then the calls came back, one by one. They were not warm. They were not curious. They were efficient. My sister called with a problem she framed as temporary. My dad followed up with a reminder about family responsibility. My mom left a voicemail that sounded tired and disappointed, telling me everyone missed how things used to be. That line hit harder than anything else. Not, "We miss you." Just, "We miss how things used to be." I went to a family gathering after that, mostly to confirm what I already suspected. The moment I walked in, I could feel the tension. Conversations paused, then restarted with forced cheer. Someone made a joke about how busy I must be now that I was too important to help out like before. Laughter followed, thin and uncomfortable. I realized something in that moment that made my stomach drop. They were not angry because I had hurt them. They were angry because I had disrupted the system. Near the end of the night, I overheard something I was not meant to hear. My sister and my aunt in the kitchen, voices low but sharp. They were talking about budgets, about how things were tighter lately, about how I had pulled away at the worst possible time. Not once did they mention me as a person, just me as a resource. I stood there, frozen, listening to the truth finally say itself out loud. This was never about closeness. It was about access. I left early without saying much. No one stopped me. Driving home, I felt hollow, but also steady in a way I never had before. The guilt was still there, but it was losing its grip. In its place was something quieter and stronger. Acceptance. They loved the role I played. They loved what I made easier. But they did not know me beyond that. And the hardest realization of all was this. If I went back to how things were, they would welcome me with open arms, smiles, relief, praise. But it would not be because they missed me. It would be because they missed what I gave. That night, I made a decision that would change how I showed up forever. And I knew, once I made it, there would be no going back. The decision itself was quiet, but living with it was not. I did not cut anyone off. I did not announce boundaries like a manifesto. I simply changed how I showed up. When someone called with a problem, I listened without reaching for a solution. When money came up, I said I could not help and did not explain myself. When guilt tried to creep in, I reminded myself that exhaustion is not a moral failure. At first, they treated it like a phase. My mom would say things like, "Once things settle down for you," or "when you are less stressed," as if the old version of me was just on vacation. My sister tried humor, making comments about how I had gone soft or selfish. My dad went quiet, which somehow felt louder than anger. What surprised me was how uncomfortable they seemed when I talked about my own life. I mentioned taking a short trip. The room went still. I talked about a class I signed up for, something I had wanted to do for years. No one asked questions. It was like my independence did not fit into the family language anymore. There was no place to put it. Then came the twist I was not prepared for. A real emergency hit. Not a manufactured one. Not a budgeting problem or a bad decision being quietly patched over. Something serious. The kind of thing that, a year ago, would have automatically landed on my shoulders. I got the call late at night. The tone was different. Sharper. Afraid. My first instinct was to jump in. Adrenaline already rising. Muscles tensing like they remembered exactly what to do. And for a moment, I almost did. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling that old pull, that familiar identity rushing back. The fixer. The anchor. The one who makes it all okay. Then I asked a question I had never asked before. I asked who else was helping. The silence that followed told me everything. They had waited for me, counted on me, assumed I would step in, because I always had. My absence had not been planned for. There was no backup, no shared responsibility. I helped that night, but not the way I used to. I did what I could without sacrificing myself. I stayed within my limits. I did not absorb everything, and I made it clear it was temporary. The shift after that was immediate and unsettling. Gratitude came back, but it felt fragile, conditional, like they were testing whether I might slip back into my old role if they handled me carefully enough. I realized then that this was the real test. Not whether I could say no, but whether I could say yes without losing myself again. Because if I crossed that line, even once, the old expectations would come roaring back. And I could feel them watching, waiting, trying to see which version of me would win. The waiting was the hardest part. After that emergency, everyone acted careful around me, like I was something that might crack if handled the wrong way. Calls came with more politeness. Requests were softened with extra words. Gratitude showed up again, but it felt rehearsed, like someone reading lines they hoped would get the right reaction. I could feel the pull every time. The old version of me was still there, ready to step forward and smooth everything out. There was comfort in that role. Familiarity. If I went back fully, things would be easier. For them. For me. In a twisted way too. No tension. No awkwardness. No quiet resentment simmering under the surface. But something else had changed. I had started to like who I was becoming when I was not constantly giving pieces of myself away. I liked waking up without dread. I liked having energy that belonged to me. I liked not feeling invisible the moment I stopped being useful. Still, doubt crept in late at night. I asked myself if I was being too harsh. If I was punishing them for something they never consciously chose. After all, nobody had forced me to say yes all those years. I had stepped into that role willingly. I had built my identity around being dependable. Maybe this was partly my fault. That thought almost pulled me back. Then the final twist came, and it was the simplest one of all. My birthday came and went. No big plans. No family dinner. No long phone calls. A few short messages trickled in throughout the day. Polite. Delayed. One of them even ended with a reminder about something coming up the following week that might need my help. I sat there that night, cake from a grocery store on the counter, candles burning low, and it finally clicked in a way nothing else had before. When I was constantly giving, my presence was celebrated. When I stopped, my existence became optional. They did not ask how I spent the day. They did not wonder if I felt lonely. They did not notice the quiet shift at all. And that clarity did not hurt the way I expected it to. It steadied me. Because in that moment, I understood that I could keep chasing conditional appreciation for the rest of my life, or I could choose something else entirely. Something calmer. Something honest. I did not need to be resented or praised to know my worth. I just needed to stop proving it to people who only saw me when they needed something. The next time my phone lit up with a familiar request, I looked at it without guilt, without anger, and without fear. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The next time the phone rang, I did not rush to answer it. I was sitting on my couch, coffee cooling on the table, sunlight coming through the window in a way I used to miss because I was always somewhere else, doing something for someone. I watched the screen light up with my sister's name and felt calm. No spike of anxiety. No automatic calculation of how much this would cost me. Just awareness. I let it ring. Then I listened to the voicemail. It followed the same pattern I knew by heart. A problem. A little urgency. A soft reminder that family helps family. She did not ask how I was. She did not mention my birthday from the week before. She ended with, "Let me know as soon as you can." Like my response time was the real issue. I sat there for a long moment after it ended, and that was when everything finally settled into place. I realized that I had been measuring love by effort for most of my life. By how much I could carry, how much I could fix, how much of myself I could give away without complaint. I thought sacrifice was proof. I thought exhaustion meant I was doing it right. But real love does not require you to disappear. Real love does not panic when you set a boundary. It does not fade when you stop being useful. It does not keep score of what you provide while ignoring who you are. I called her back later that day. Not immediately. Not apologetically. I told her I could not help this time. I did not explain. I did not justify. I wished her well and ended the call. The reaction was exactly what I expected and somehow still sad. Distance. Coolness. A subtle withdrawal. No explosion. Just a quiet reshuffling. Like they were learning to live without a piece they had taken for granted. And that was okay. Because here is the part one did not understand before. Their reaction was not my responsibility. I still see my family. I still care. But I no longer bend myself into shapes that make them comfortable at my expense. I show up as I am, not as what I provide. Sometimes that means I am less celebrated. Sometimes it means I am barely noticed. But I am not empty anymore. I sleep. I laugh. I make plans that do not revolve around solving someone else's crisis. I am learning what it feels like to be valued by myself first, and that has changed everything. If they ever learn to love me without needing something from me, I will meet them there. And if they do not, I will still be okay. Because I finally understand this, and it is the truth I wish I had learned years ago. Love that depends on constant sacrifice is not love. And my worth was never meant to be proven by how much of myself I was willing to give away.